go ahead and say good afternoon to everybody, and we will get started here at 45 minutes after the hour. But just wanted to say hello to those of you who are joining us so far. So, Ronald, thank you so much. Glad you were here, and glad you're involved to assist and hang out at that too. Great. Thank you for sharing that. You never know about these things, right? So I'm glad that you could verify that all is well on that front. So Ronald, where are you located? North Carolina. What part? Gotcha. That's great. I've got some family actually who were in town this weekend from Raleigh, North Carolina. So we've got some family down in that area, and so nice part of the country to spend some time. That is for sure. Indeed. Looks like we are at 2:45 Eastern time. So I'm going to go ahead and kick off our show for today. And so I'll say to everyone, first of all, just welcome to the presentation on wealth building with the Kingdom Mindset. So my name is Chris Woods. I am founder of a firm called LifePoint Financial Group, located in Alexandria, Virginia, just outside DC. I'm also a certified financial planner and a certified Kingdom advisor. Some of you might be familiar with the CFP designation, but the Kingdom advisor designation is one where we focus on biblical financial principles. So I've taken some studies in that to obtain this designation. And in fact, a lot of the information and materials that I'm going to share are from our Kingdom Advisors network. And so I want to give credit where credit is due and using some of their materials in this presentation. And also a gentleman by the name of Ron Blue started Kingdom Advisors. So I'll give some credit to him as well with some of the stuff that I'm going to be sharing today. You just add a disclaimer too, as we do in the financial services business quite often. And it is that this presentation is not to be taken as financial advice for your specific situation. Everyone's situation is unique. And before you act on anything that I share in this presentation, you should consult a financial or tax professional to determine if that course of action is appropriate for your situation. So that's my disclaimer that, and I want to say that because I think right now, especially in our world of social media, we see so many influencers out there talking about finance, and sometimes it may not be appropriate for your situation, but you don't see those disclaimers that are kind of given out on social media in our world. So I wanted to share that as a disclaimer up front. But let's go ahead and get into the agenda for today. I'm going to first of all talk about what an earthly view of finances looks like versus the kingdom view, where we're trying to get to. Then we'll discuss some biblical money management principles that truly stand the test of time. And we'll wrap up with some practical, tangible wealth building steps that you can walk out in your own personal finances. So let's start with our earthly view of money. And we live in a society where we think that uh, we can find success, security, and significance by having more money. And all of these ideas are certainly reinforced on social media, and so and I've seen as a financial advisor that the pursuit of and protection of money leads to arguments, breakups, divorces, physical and emotional trauma, tragically even death as well. And so, money, hear about this being the root of all evils. And, you can often trace a lot of things back to money. And so, but here's the thing. God knew we would need help in this area, which is why I'm excited to talk about this today. In fact, if you look at the Bible, there are approximately 2,350 verses in the Bible that talk about money or the use of it. And compare that with about 500 on faith and prayer. So it's a stark contrast, and so it's incredible how much the Lord knew we would need Bible verses to refer to in thinking about money. And so to me, money is truly something that we should be thinking about from a kingdom perspective, given all those verses in the Bible that talk about it. And we're going to go into some of those details today. So in order to move to this, shift from this earthly view to the kingdom mindset that I was referring to, we need to start with this very simple premise, and that is the mindset that God owns it all. And, if you're able to truly pause and believe and internalize this concept, it will completely change your view of money, change your view of giving, change the way you look at a lot of things. And so if we start with that concept that God owns it all, and we're truly just called to be stewards of what he's blessed us with. And money's meant to be a tool to accomplish all that God desires for us. We've turned it into something that we worship, where our personal worth is tied to how much money that we have. And that's not the way money is intended to be used in our lives, nor the way God wants it to be used in our lives as well. So if we can release the ownership that we always take on our money, understand that he owns it all, we're just called to be good stewards of it, and that'll really change our relationship with money and with life as well. So let me continue on. There's a couple of things, if you try to move towards this kingdom mindset, we should keep in mind that will help move us in this direction. Gratitude being the first. Be thankful for what God's blessed you with. That's obvious, but we don't take enough time or write down enough, areas where we need to feel gratitude. The second area that we can go a long way in moving towards this kingdom mindset is just taking the idea of stewardship seriously. I mentioned that, we don't own it. We're just called to be good stewards. Well, take this object or take this concept of stewardship seriously. Pray for wisdom and discernment in this area. Acknowledge that God owns it all, yes, but we all still have a role to play. And so if you just remember the parable of the talents, I think this was very clear in the Bible, how God will bless those who are good stewards of what he's blessed us with. So that to me is one of the best examples in the Bible, and one of the best examples why we need to be good stewards of what he's blessed us with. And so let me go ahead and get into some time-tested money management principles. And to do that, I'm going to share my screen here. Let me just do this first. Okay, do this. And oops. Oh, there we go. Okay. Yep, there we go. So what you're seeing on the screen there, these are some time-tested, transcendent financial planning principles. And of course, you're looking at these and they're pretty obvious when you read them, but it's the application of these principles that I believe is transcendent. So stay with me here for a second. We just talked about the idea that God owns it all. I want to now get into the idea of just spend less than you earn. And you're all looking at this thinking, hey, I'm sitting here on a Saturday to hear some guy tell me spend less than you earn. Well, it goes so much farther than that. It's so much bigger than that as well. We've already heard some people today talking about forming a budget for yourself and how important it is to track your spending each month and put a plan in place for how you're doing and how you're going to spend, how you're going to save. And to me, this goes right back to that area of stewardship, right? And so there's some great software programs out there, programs like Mint or programs like You Need a Budget are two that I like to refer people to. Literally just youneedabudget.com is the name of that. So that's a real thing. Or even Excel spreadsheet works well for those who are just trying to begin that process of tracking. But this is something we need to do. Until we wrap our arms around our finances in this capacity, we don't really know how we're doing. For most people, we feel like if we have money left at the end of the month, then we're doing okay. And that's really not the case at all. You need to have a plan for how you're going to be tracking your spending. And this is really that first step of getting control of what your finances truly are. And as I mentioned before, this is one of to me, the most critical parts of stewardship. He's blessed you with an income. He's blessed you with finances to steward. You need to take this seriously and figure out how much is coming in, how much is going out, and having a plan for both. The next there is avoid debt. I like to mention this when I have conversations with other Christians because of the fact that some people in our community might think that debt is a sin. Well, the Bible doesn't say that debt is actually a sin, but what it does say, and you see the Bible verse here, is we don't want to be a slave to the lender. We don't want to be a slave to the lender or to be burdened by debt. So you should, in fact, try to aggressively eliminate debt as much as you can, yes. But I wanted to just maybe clear that up for some who feel like it's a sin to have it. And it's really what it is. We don't want to be burdened by it or be a slave to the debt itself. So just make sure in this area that you are aggressively working to eliminate the debt and having a plan for that. Minimum payments are not a plan. Making sure that you know exactly what year and what month your debt will be paid off. That is a plan that you should have for any of your debt obligations that you currently have. So just work to aggressively whittle that down. I'll talk more about that area a little bit later. This fourth area on this page here talks about building liquidity or building margin. So once you've gone through that process of tracking your spending for yourself and you set that budget for yourself so you know what's coming in, you know what's going out, hopefully you have some additional money to save each month. And I'm not referring to your 401k or 403b or your TSP in this case. You should have that too, by the way. So you should have those as well. Have a retirement plan. Hopefully you have a workplace retirement plan. Or if you're an entrepreneur, having a SEP IRA or a solo 401k. But what I'm really referring to in this area of building liquidity is having money you're setting aside each month for yourself, for spending that's going to occur prior to retirement. And so that's part of what I'm trying to go for here is building that liquidity, building margin each month. You see the Bible verse associated, which is in here talks more about, rainy day type provisions. But where I'm really going with this is just making sure that you actually are setting aside something each month that will then plan for your future, and not just in retirement accounts. I'm talking about in savings accounts and non-retirement investment accounts as well. And I'll touch more on this idea in a few minutes too. The fifth thing on here is setting long-term goals. Stephen Covey talks often about beginning with the end in mind. And, what are the long-term financial goals that you have? And the first thing I would say to do is write them down. Don't just say you want to retire. You're saving for retirement. What does that really mean? Where do you want to live? What do you want to do in retirement? How much will it cost? These are things you need to understand and know and plan for, and just calling it retirement is not enough. Not enough. So we need to be thinking through what we can be doing in each of these areas from a planning perspective. And, for example, too, I know some people have a goal of sending their kids to college, and that's a great goal. We all should strive for that for those of us who have kids. But where do they want to go to school? How much is that going to cost? How much should you be saving each month to fund these different goals that we're talking about, whether it be retirement or kids' education? That's the part where most people fail in this process. We all have these goals, but we don't have a plan for how we're going to achieve these goals, right? And so again, this kind of comes back. This is a stewardship principle. This is a biblical principle of long-term planning, and we see that here the Bible verse associated with that on the screen. I think about Jeremiah as well and the wall. And Jeremiah had a plan to build the wall, and so that's a great example of a character in the Bible who had a plan to build the wall, and he executed. Had many people involved, and the same is true for our finance. We need to have a plan. We need to have people involved, whether it's a financial advisor or an accountant or an estate attorney. These are all people who will help you put that plan together for yourself. And again, this is also another biblical principle. And I feel like oftentimes with goals, these long-term goals like this, I think we all have a case of the Sundays in this country that we love talking about these things, and someday we're going to get to it. But I can tell you in my practice so often, I talk to clients who are saving for these different goals, but there's no plan in place to do it. They're throwing money at an account, but have no idea if what they're throwing at that account is going to be enough. And we all need to really get more specific about what these plans truly are and how we're going to save to do them. And again, I come back to Jeremiah again as well. If you read those verses in the Bible about how specific they were about building the wall and the plan they had in place, the same is true for us. So we've got to take this seriously. And just saying retirement, just throwing money in an account is not enough. We need to know on a monthly basis today, are we saving enough today to meet these goals each month? So next point on this list is give generously. And that's clearly I think hopefully something most Christians aspire to as well. But I want to take a few minutes on this because I hear people say often, hey, I can't afford to give, or I work hard for my money. And again, remember I said before that God owns it all. Tithing is just giving money back to God, right? Who is truly the owner of it. God's blessed us with our talents. He's blessed us with resources. He's blessed us with our information and our knowledge. And so to not be a faithful giver, to me, it's just, there's really a tremendous disconnect if we're not seeing the importance of doing that. And, again, going back to that concept of God owning and all, this is, if we can understand that, this would help us release our giving, because we hold on to money so tightly. But the idea of giving breaks the power of money. So many people hold on to it. Again, it's my money. I worked hard. I'm not going to give it up. But if you remember, again, especially with tithing, you're just giving back to God the first fruits, that first tenth that's rightfully His anyway. And also just that process of doing that will break that power, that stronghold that it often has in many of our lives, how we just don't want to give that up to anyone else because we think it's ours. So we, again, remember that concept, but I'll come back to it. Of course, God owns it all. First, we are just called to be good stewards of this. So let me kind of walk this out for a minute and show you some more practical ways to kind of think through this. And let me go to this chart here. Let's see here. Is that what I want? Okay. Hopefully we can all see this sequential investing chart here. And, so this is kind of what it really says here, this idea of doing some of these steps in order for your finances. And a lot of us sometimes want to jump ahead. And I think, by the way, there are some exceptions to this order that I'll get into in a minute. And I'll point out where the exceptions are. But in general, you'd like to follow a similar type order when it comes. And so a couple of foundational things that exist in all five of those principles, as you see on the screen, that, for one, economic conditions are always transcendent, but so are biblical principles. Those principles that I showed you on the previous slide are true yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We remember when we do those, if you do those five things, you will put yourself in a good position financially. Now I want to get into a few more tangible steps to walk some of this out. So starting with this first level one, I do want to say, some of you might be followers of Dave Ramsey, where, one of his tenets in terms of his steps here is talking about the idea of saving up $1,000 first, as kind of an emergency fund before you start making more significant payments of any debt. So if you're in a position where you do have, some high interest rate short-term debt from credit cards or consumer debt, that's not bad advice. The idea of at least having a small emergency fund available to you should something else pop up. I think that's okay for those who want to create that a smaller emergency fund first before you start more aggressively paying down some of your higher interest rate debt. The other thing as well, if you do have debt you're trying to pay down, I would also add that you should still contribute to a workplace retirement plan that's offering a match, because this match is free money. And if you think about the compounding of the free money that you can get from that workplace retirement plan, that's something that you shouldn't forego. So even if you do have some debt that you're paying back, I would still suggest for most that you do look at adding to the workplace retirement plan at least enough to get your full match out of it. After that, then I think you can get into a few different decisions for what you do with that next dollar after that match has been met. But that's another, I guess, somewhat exception, I'll say, to the order that I'm presenting with this sequential investing diagram. So again, high interest rate card debt, high interest rate debt, level one. Level two, an emergency fund. And we all should have this. During the pandemic, I think a lot of people in our space have talked about extending this. The traditional guidance has been 3 to 6 months of your monthly living expenses should be in an emergency fund. Some have talked about even 6 to 9 months now with this pandemic, and given some of the job instability that exists out there in some cases. And I think this is, kind of a good question if you ever sit down with a financial advisor for them to help you with this. But 3 to 6 months is a good rule of thumb, to have, if you can, in cash before you start making other more significant investments, and that'll give you a cushion. And the variables that exist could be, are you a 1 or 2 income household? Do you have multiple streams of income? If you do, then that could probably be closer to 3 months, right? But if you're the only breadwinner in the family, then you might want to try to build up a larger cushion should something happen to your job and you have some additional money to be able to fund expenses while you're trying to pursue new employment. Level 3 here, this is the one I got to say, as a financial planner, that gets missed. This is the biggest gap that exists in many people's financial plans. I think in America, we've done an above average job for those who have access to a 401k or a 403b or a TSP or some kind of retirement savings plan. We've done a good job of making those available, making them accessible. And so for those who have the access, who are using them, they tend to work well, mostly because you don't have to think about it. If you just sign up for it, it's a set it and forget it scenario. It's going to occur for you on every paycheck. But what doesn't happen very well is for people who are taking time to save for themselves for things they may want to purchase prior to retirement. So whether it be something like you see cars or homes or furniture on here, these are larger expense items. And this is where I was saying a little bit earlier about that idea of building liquidity or building margin for yourself and having some amount going from your checking account to either a savings account or another investment account that you have. And this needs to occur on a monthly basis to begin saving for these types of larger purchases. And so this is, again, a big gap that most people don't think about doing, but this will help you avoid going into debt for cars or going into debt for furniture when you need to purchase these, if you can start early and begin to save, or at least it'll minimize the amount of debt you need to take out if you're able to do that. So just kind of think about that too, as you are looking to save for these different things. One thing I'll mention too about time frames, if you're looking to save for something, in less than 7 years or so, then you're going to want to look at a different investment mix. So for example, you're trying to save for a car, you're trying to save for a home, maybe in the next few years or so, you're going to want to leave that money or have most of that money out of the stock market. So maybe either a high yield savings account, maybe an account that has mostly fixed income. because you could get caught in the middle of a down cycle in the market if you're invested in the stock market for something that's going to occur in the next several years or so. And the last thing you want to have happen is trying to buy a home in 2023, for example, then the market, like we saw in 2008, drops 40%. And now you just delayed your new home that much farther. But if it were in cash, you wouldn't have that same issue. So just think about, for your shorter term time horizons for these larger purchase goals, maybe a high yield savings account, maybe something that's more heavily weighted towards fixed income, where you don't have as much exposure to volatility within the portfolio as you would if it were all in the stock market. Level 4, this is something that we're talking about more of your longer term goals. I talked about this earlier: retirement, college education for a child, for example, or for yourself. And different items that are for some longer term investments. This is where you do want to be mostly in stocks, mostly in the stock market. And I always, not always, but I oftentimes share with people that when you're talking about longer term investing like this, again, for your retirement in particular, or even for education or some other things that are further out into the future, this is where you do want to be in the stock market, in stocks. And I would encourage you to look at a more diversified portfolio, a more diversified mix of investments as well. I think that with the rise of some of these apps out there like Robinhood and others, we feel empowered and emboldened to go out and purchase individual stocks and do some day trading ourselves. And I got to tell you, that is not a great long-term strategy. If you do have money that you want to carve out for yourself to invest with and play with on the side, then I think that's great. You have companies you believe in. I think that's going to be something good to do for yourself. But when you're starting to think about your future, this stock market in the United States has been a resilient one for a long time. And we've seen that if you're invested in a diversified portfolio, that, over different 10-year periods, you typically come out ahead when you do that. But if you start trying to do individual stocks, it becomes a lot more challenging to do that, because we all think we can time the market, that we can day trade, we can figure out, the right time to buy, right time to sell. And I can tell you that we don't. There's plenty of research out there that will suggest to the contrary, that we are not that individuals are not good at doing this. And so that's where that we want to continue to focus on more diversified assets in our portfolio for longer term investing. And then, if you do have some of those other goals met that you're trying to save for example, retirement or education or other things you're trying to do, then maybe you think about carving out a different account for some individual stocks that you want to pursue. So, but as I mentioned, most of these retirement accounts specifically, you really can't access until you're 59 and a half, right? And so with that in mind, for those who are younger, and you're maybe thinking about some more shorter term goals, you should be thinking about other investment accounts, a taxable investment account, what we refer to it as, which is really a non-retirement investment account. That's one thing you can consider for yourself to invest in between now and retirement. So then level 5, is the one thing exception on our list. I said there's a few exceptions. One of them on this sequential investing list is a new business, and I think for some people, this chart kind of suggests you should have all these other goals met before you start a new business. I don't think that's necessarily true, but you do need to have a really good plan in place. I tell friends and clients all the time that anyone can start a new business, but not everybody should. And it is difficult. And I think this is the case where we talked about it, that emergency fund. You're going to want to have an even larger emergency fund before you start a business, right? And so that's something else to consider if that's something you're trying to do. But I will say that is something that a lot of people do, and with success. But I will also mention that you don't read about business failures very often on social media. forward magazines, right? You only see people's highlight reel of successes on social media. So if that's something that you do want to pursue for yourself, which I encourage entrepreneurship. I started my own practice myself, so I encourage people to do it when it makes sense, but just make sure you have a plan in place and resources and reserves in place if that's the direction you're trying to go. One thing I'm going to just speak very briefly on, that's this idea of cryptocurrencies. Not enough time to get into it in this session. But, I think that this has become a very hot topic. And the one thing I'll say about it is for those who want to invest in it for themselves, that's something great to consider. If it is in my opinion, a much smaller percentage of your overall investable assets. Like a low single digit number even is what we talk about. So I'll leave it at that. I may get into more of that in the Q&A if we have time. But I see too many people who are throwing a ton of money at this asset class when they shouldn't. Back in 2017, Bitcoin, 2018, I guess it was, Bitcoin dropped 80% in 2018. And even recently, just a tweet by Elon Musk caused it to fall over 20%. So when those types of things happen, you don't want to be betting your retirement on that, right? But for those who can absorb the risk, then it could make sense for some, but that's something you should really consult a professional before you wade into those waters, because there's some other risk involved that people aren't aware of, particularly on the tax side. So now let's see here. We don't have too much time left. I want to say a few more things and we'll kind of get into the Q&A for a few minutes here, but I want to show you one more thing. Then let's see here. Let's show you this chart real quick. Then we'll get into some questions if we have them. So this chart shows what we would refer to is just 5 uses of money. Live, owe, give, and grow. And so what we're talking about here is these are different categories of money, if you will. The live category is your living expenses. This is basically everything that you own or consume. That's why it's the biggest category in this pie chart. So this would include, your rent or your mortgage, all your expenses, everything that you own or consume is going to fall into this live category for living expenses. There's also the idea of owing debt, which of course, debt obligations, your taxes. The grow is your savings. So however much you're saving each year would go into this grow category. And then we see the give category as well. What the world would tell you, what the earthly view of this chart would tell you is when you're putting a budget together, is that we would first look at our living expenses and figure out what those are. We would then, cover any debt obligations that we have. Our debts and our taxes will then get paid next. Then after that, if there's anything left over, we might try to save a little bit, right? That's the next thing we do in this chart. Then the last thing that we would do, once we figured out our living expenses, how much we owe, how much we want to save, then maybe we'll give some if there's anything left over, right? And so that is exactly what you don't want to do. I would tell you that what needs to happen from a kingdom perspective is that should be flipped on its head. The first thing you should be doing, again, is tithing. That's the first thing that should happen here. So the first thing you should be doing is pay God. That happens first. Second thing, pay yourself, right? Figure out how much you're going to save for yourself and for other goals that you want to fund. Number 3, get into what you might owe debt or owe taxes. And once you've covered all those, you need to figure out a way to live on the rest. That's what your living expenses should be. We got this turned around in this country. We go out and try these homes we can't afford, buy cars we can't afford. Then we have no money to save, no money to give. That is not good stewardship. That is not how the Lord wants us to use our finances. Again, pay God first, pay yourself, pay anything you owe. Then you need to figure out a way to live on the rest. One example, I had a client of mine last year now, who bought a new home. And I remember we were talking about how big of a home she wanted to buy. She went and saw her mortgage lender, and they approved her for a number. She kind of came back to me and she said, "Hey, here's what they approved me for my mortgage." And I looked at it and I said, "So let me get this straight. So you still do want to tithe, right?" She's like, "Yep." "And you still want to save for your retirement and for your kids' education too, right?" She's like, "Yep." And I said, "Well, then what you need to be looking at is a mortgage that's about 60% of this number." And that's what she did. She downsized from what the mortgage lender told her and actually bought a home that was, again, 40% less than what they told her. Right. So she was approved for a big amount. And had she done that, which is what most people do, most people go up to the max for what their mortgage lender says, then they have no money to save, no money to give. And that's the wrong thing to do. We need to flip that around, do this in reverse, right? Figure out, get your tithes right. Figure out how much do you need to save for yourself, right? And also for the goals that you're trying to fund. Then you figure out your obligations. Then whatever is left over, that's what you should be living off of. And that's what we did for this client of mine. We did these things in reverse. We figured out the giving, figured out the savings. And then we figured out, okay, based on how you want to live, these are the other things you want to do for in terms of vacation, her budget for dining out. We know she's going to end up buying other cars down the road, how much she should be saving for other cars, things like that. So we're able to kind of get back into a number. So in our case, the mortgage figure was the number at the end of the equation. We figured out everything else first, and we said, here's how much is left over. This is how much your mortgage payment should be. And we figured out how to do that with her number. So that's exactly what we did. And that's exactly what we should be doing and thinking through, you know, for all of you in your personal finances as well. So that's just a very important chart I wanted to show you. Now, I think we're only down to a few minutes. So let me just kind of wrap up with a couple of concluding thoughts, and I'll kind of get into, some questions. When we start thinking about, again, staying on this chart for a minute, that biggest piece of the pie is living expenses. And I think that we oftentimes, have this discussion and we just have a few, drink 2 less Starbucks coffees a week. It's going to get us there over time. And that's true. We should be doing that. Be prudent about your finances. But as I mentioned, these bigger ticket items like your home, like your rent, like your car, this is exactly what you should be looking at, trying to reduce, trying to fit those into your budget after your other goals have been met. So that's kind of one thing. The other thing I want to talk about in that living expense section, and this is actually a question that every Christian needs to answer for themselves. And it's a very simple question. And that is, how much is enough? You should think about that for a minute. How much is enough? The answer to that question is different for everybody. So I'm not here to judge. That is something that we all need to think about, though, is how much is enough? How big of a house do we really need to have? How expensive of a car do we really need to have? How many things do we really need to have? And again, no judgment is being passed here. I'm just asking you all to think about that and you start thinking through this chart and that living expense piece of the pie, because I think if we all scrutinize that a bit better and really thought about, how much do we really need, we might think about some of these things differently. So, so with that, just to conclude my thoughts here, we talked about from the very beginning, God owns it all. We're just called to be good stewards of what he's blessed us with. Have I mentioned that, by the way? So just keep that in mind. Also, just make sure you all are tracking and prioritizing your spending the right way. Set some long-term goals that are specific, right? The SMART goals we talk about all the time, and have a plan for how you're going to achieve them. And finally, listen, if all this stuff is not your cup of tea, listen, you look at these things and you say to yourself, hey, this isn't, I just don't understand and don't want to know this. Well, then seek a financial professional out. I'll fully acknowledge there's certain things I'm not great at who I seek help with. This is an area where you should be doing that too. If this is not your cup of tea, seek the advice of a professional who can help you in these areas to plan, as I mentioned before. So with that, I know we're down to about 4 minutes left, so I ran a little bit long on my presentation, but let me pause here for any questions that anyone might have. So, and actually I saw Ronald ask me a question about the percentages. So That's a good question, and that's really one that's going to truly vary by person in terms of, but I think if you start backing into some of these, you can start thinking about, a 10 to a 15% number for your giving. Because by the way, I want to separate giving and tithing. Okay, to me, the tithe is the first fruits, the first 10%. Anything beyond that, to me, that you're going to be offering over and above at the church would be falling into the giving category, or any other charitable pursuits that you have would be kind of giving to me. So I'm going to separate, for the purpose of this discussion, kind of tithing and giving. But you think about that from a giving perspective, and then you start getting into how much you're going to be saving, and that's going to be a number that could be closer to. Well, actually, that's a number that can really vary by individual and by family in terms of how much you have available to save. But so I know I'm not giving you what you want, because I think these can truly vary by person. But again, if you can kind of get the giving and the growing and the savings part right, then you begin to see how these other pieces will fall in line together as well.
Chris, great presentation. I see that you have another question here also. I don't know if you answered this earlier. What is an example of a non-retirement investment account?
Oh, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Thank you, Chuck. So this would be, we refer to these as taxable investment accounts. So retirement accounts are 401ks, IRAs, 403bs. If you work for the government, it's a TSP. These are retirement accounts. These are accounts that if you try to withdraw the money prior to 59 and a half, you're going to be assessed a penalty. Usually it's a 10% penalty for withdrawing money from these accounts early. There are accounts you can invest in and put money into that don't have this penalty. And we refer to them as taxable investment accounts, because inside of a retirement account, you're actually not paying taxes on any of your interest or dividends or capital gains each year. Those continue to grow in the account until you withdraw the money. Then when you withdraw the money from a retirement account in retirement, that's when it gets taxed. A non-retirement investment account, you will get taxed along the way, but you don't have a penalty assessed for doing so, for withdrawing money from those accounts. So I know we're kind of at time here, but any other questions I can answer quickly before we things wrap up here? So I want to thank you all for coming, and feel free to reach out. I think I mentioned in my virtual booth here that I do offer a free consultation for those who are looking to explore what it's like to work with a certified financial planner. So happy to share that as well. So thank you all for coming to the presentation today, and I will look forward to hopefully seeing you again a little bit later on in our virtual exhibits as well. So thank you very much for your time today, and take care. Hey, Chuck, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So I was speeding through stuff, but I think I got through most of what I wanted to. So,
well, we appreciate it. And I do apologize. I was in and out. Apparently, we had some tech issues in some of the other sessions. So I was hopping around trying to get everybody situated. I was supposed to be your coverage for this session, but
that's all right.
There were other issues that needed help. But, well, you can join us for the wrap up. And thank you again for your presentation.
No problem. No problem. So is it wrap up at 4? Is that right?
No, I think the wrap up is scheduled. Let's see if I can.
Because was there something at 4 o'clock too? That I wrote that down in
Well,
my.
at 4 o'clock, we're asking all of the presenters if they could be at their virtual booth just for interaction.
Oh, that's it.
Wrap up is actually supposed to be there now, so
Okay.
I need to be going.
Okay, I'll go jump in there myself too.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Chuck. I appreciate it.
All right.